10-year-old Jake stood nervously in the courtroom, clutching the microphone with trembling hands. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. His first words were heartbreaking. "My future is ruined." Just weeks ago, Jake's life was normal. He worried only about school and playing with friends. But now he was standing in court, testifying against his own mother. He couldn't even bring himself to look at her as he continued. "Mommy used me. She did a bad thing." His sobs filled the room, and the judge called for a brief recess so a child therapist could calm him. The courtroom was packed, with reporters and onlookers eager to understand what had led to this moment. What had Marianne done to her son? Why did Jake feel so betrayed? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The story began weeks earlier when Jake's suspicions were first raised. One day, he found a letter on the ground addressed to him, his first piece of mail. Excited, he opened it, only to find numbers and words he couldn't understand. When he asked his mother about it, she snatched it away and told him to go upstairs. Jake started noticing strange things. His mother spent hours on hushed phone calls and refused to give him money. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake cleverly tricked his mother into signing a note so he could skip school. Instead of going to class, he started following her movements. He visited her workplace, only to learn she hadn't been showing up for weeks. He was stunned. His mother had been lying, not just to him but to her boss as well. One weekend, Jake noticed his mother's phone ringing and saw his father's name on the screen. When he tried to answer it, she quickly took the phone and walked away to have a heated conversation. This confirmed his fears. Something serious was going on. Unsure of what to do, Jake decided to go to the police. At the station, Jake explained his concerns. The officers took him seriously, documenting everything he said. Days later, Jake saw his mother sneaking out late at night, heading toward a dimly lit parking lot. His curiosity piqued, and he decided to follow her. From the shadows, Jake watched his mother move through the dark parking lot. She approached a man under a flickering street lamp. His mother handed over a stack of documents, and the man quickly slipped them into his jacket. Jake strained to hear their conversation, but could only catch fragments of their hushed voices. Frightened and unsure of what to do, Jake confided in his best friend, Emma, the next day. Emma listened carefully as Jake recounted everything he had seen and heard. "This sounds really scary," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to figure out what's really going on." Emma suggested they ask her father, a lawyer, for advice without revealing too many details. Jake agreed, feeling relieved to have someone on his side. That night, Emma's father offered a plan. They needed to gather more proof before taking any serious action. Jake decided to pay closer attention to his mother's behavior. He noticed that she grew anxious whenever the mail arrived, her hands shaking as she quickly tucked letters away in her room. One day, when his mother was out, Jake seized the opportunity to sneak into her room. He opened her drawers and searched through stacks of papers. His heart sank when he found documents with his forged signature and bank statements showing large transactions, all in his mother's name. Overwhelmed, Jake sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his face. His mother had betrayed him. The evidence was clear. She was doing something illegal and using his name to do it. He knew he had to act, but dreaded what it might mean for their family. After carefully putting everything back in place, Jake turned to Emma's father for help. He brought the documents and explained everything he had found. Mr. Thompson, Emma's father, examined the papers with a serious expression. "You did the right thing, Jake," he said. "This is serious, but we'll handle it together." The following days were tense as Jake kept a close eye on his mother's behavior. One afternoon, while his mother was distracted, Jake managed to record a portion of one of her phone calls. The conversation was vague but hinted at financial troubles, and something she was desperately trying to cover up. It was another crucial piece of evidence for their growing case. Back at the cafe, Jake and Mr. Thompson reviewed everything they had so far. They now had bank statements, forged documents, and even the recorded phone call. Mr. Thompson was impressed by Jake's bravery and thoroughness. "This is enough to build a strong case," he said. but it's going to be tough. Are you ready for that?" Jake nodded, though fear and sadness gripped his heart. The thought of testifying against his mother was heartbreaking, but he knew he had no choice. The day finally came when Jake had to confront his mother directly. He waited until she was home and asked her about the documents he had found. "Mom, why are there papers with my name on them?" he asked, his voice trembling. His mother froze, her face turning pale. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her tone defensive. When Jake pressed her further, she exploded in anger. "You have no right to go through my things," she yelled. Grabbing her purse, she stormed out of the room, leaving Jake feeling both hurt and more certain of her guilt. That confrontation solidified Jake's resolve. He handed over all the evidence to Mr. Thompson, who assured him that justice would prevail. "You've done everything you could, Jake," Mr. Thompson said. "Now it's up to the legal system." The courtroom was silent as Jake prepared to testify. His mother sat across from him, her face expressionless, but Jake couldn't bring himself to look at her. With trembling hands and a shaky voice, he began recounting the series of events that had led him here. "I first noticed something was wrong when I saw mail piling up at home," Jake explained. "Mom wouldn't let me see any of it. Then I started finding documents with my name on them, things I didn't understand, like bank statements." The jury listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with every word. Jake described the strange behaviors he had observed, his mother's late-night phone calls, her secretive meetings, and the papers she had hidden in her room. As Jake continued, he explained how he had taken matters into his own hands. "I found documents with my forged signature," he said, his voice cracking. "She used my name to take out loans. I didn't even know." The weight of Jake's words began to sink in. The jurors exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shock and empathy. Some reached for tissues as Jake described how discovering the truth had shattered his trust in the person he loved most. "It felt like my whole world was falling apart," Jake admitted. "She left me with so much debt, and I don't even know what it all means." His voice faltered, but he pushed forward, determined to finish his testimony. With every detail, the gravity of his mother's actions became clearer. Jake spoke about the help he received from Emma's father, Mr. Thompson, who guided him through the difficult process of collecting evidence and building a case. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. Tears glistened in the eyes of several jurors as Jake described the emotional toll of his mother's betrayal. The judge nodded solemnly, acknowledging Jake's courage. "You've been very brave," the judge said gently. "Thank you for sharing your story." The depth of Marianne's deceit was undeniable. The evidence Jake and Mr. Thompson had gathered painted a devastating picture of fraud and betrayal. As the courtroom absorbed the testimony, the focus shifted back to Marianne, whose actions had caused irreparable damage to her son. Jake's testimony continued, each word cutting through the courtroom's silence like a blade. "She falsified documents and took out loans in my name," Jake repeated, his voice trembling but firm. "I didn't even know what a loan was until I found the papers." The courtroom was visibly shaken by the gravity of his mother's actions. Marianne sat motionless, her face pale and devoid of emotion, as her son detailed the depth of her betrayal. "She ruined my future before I even had a chance to start," Jake said, tears streaming down his face. His words hit the courtroom like a wave, drawing audible gasps from the audience. The evidence presented in court was overwhelming. The judge addressed Jake directly, their tone gentle but firm. "You've shown incredible courage," the judge said. "Your bravery in coming forward has made a difference." Jake nodded, tears welling in his eyes. The courtroom fell silent as the judge turned to the jury. "You've heard the testimony and you've seen the evidence," the judge said. "It's now up to you to decide." The jury deliberated for what felt like hours. Jake sat quietly, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. When the jury returned, the verdict was read aloud. Marianne was found guilty of fraud and forgery, her schemes fully exposed. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs as Jake sat back, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over him. While justice had been served, the pain of his mother's betrayal remained. In the days that followed, Jake began to grapple with the aftermath. His mother's actions had left him in financial ruin, but with Mr. Thompson's help, steps were being taken to repair the damage. "We'll work on clearing your name," Mr. Thompson assured him. "It's going to take time, but you're not alone in this." Despite the challenges, Jake found solace in small moments of normalcy. Emma continued to be his anchor, her friendship a constant source of comfort. "You're stronger than you think," she reminded him one afternoon, "and you're going to get through this." Jake began to look ahead, determined to rebuild his life. The scars of his mother's betrayal would take time to heal, but he was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to hope for a brighter future. Tell us what you think about this story and share it with your friends. It might inspire them and brighten their day.